morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome back to the OMG MotoGP podcast. And it's a full house this week, alongside myself, Harry Benjamin, his former Grand Prix rider and British champion Keith Ewan, Crash MotoGP editor Pete McLaren, broadcaster Amy Reynolds, and our very own content creator Renita Vermeulen. And we're here to answer your questions on everything and everything, really, MotoGP and motorbike related. First of all, though, just a quick thank you to our Patreon and YouTube membership subscribers. We can't continue doing this show without your support. And as a thank you, your questions have been given priority in the time that we have available to do this show. And if you're not signed up yet, we'd love for you to join our Patreon or the newly launched YouTube membership program, which you can see down below if you're watching on YouTube. In the meantime, before we actually delve into your questions, the big news last week was the potential takeover of Dorna by Formula One's owners, Liberty Media. And now, Keith, it's all been confirmed.
Yeah, I mean, it was a done deal some time ago, I think, really. Yeah, it's one of those open secrets that finally blasted its way out. The funny thing about it was on April Fool's Day here in the UK, on April the 1st, which nobody could quite make out whether it was a joke or not. It was only because Liberty Media are the kind of people that you wouldn't expect a joke from like that. So it was done. 86% of the shares then in Dorna Sports has been taken over by Liberty Media. So that will mean that the old Bridgepoint, who had 39%, the Canadian investment company that had 38%, and then I think there were 23% in private equity that was belonging to the likes of the Espelita family. Obviously, Carmelo is the CEO. They've obviously had a bit of a sell-up as well. So 86% now are owned by Liberty. The difference between I think we should make a distinction between Liberty and the old owners, Bridgepoint and the like, the major shareholders beforehand, because Liberty aren't in the habit of flipping companies. Bridgepoint are one of those awful kind of entities that buy companies to make a massive profit off of them at the end of the day when they try and flip them over. And they've done a bloody good job. They made really big money out of this, 4 billion euro or whatever it ended up being. I can't make my mind out whether it was dollars, euros or pounds, but the fact is they've made a lot of money for their shareholders, which is their job. Same for the pension company in Canada that had money in it as well. They'll have all been very happy with it. Liberty is an entity that basically is going to enhance MotoGP. That is their job, unlike making a profit from it. Obviously, they'd like to at the end of the day if they ever do sell it on, but it's about enhancing the sport. So I personally think this is a positive thing. I think we're in positive territory, not negative. I read all the negative stuff, as I'm sure everybody else does, and I'm not. Normally I'd be Mr. Bloody cynical. That is my nature. But in this particular instance, I'm very positive about the move, and I think it's a good move. Everybody's made money out of it, which is always a good thing. But we're now onwards and upwards, and I think Liberty will carry us to the next stage. The sport won't be affected because Carmelo Espeleta and the rest of them, the management team, are still in place. Dorna have done a great job in making sure that the sport is in a good place, but it's missing the next degree, and I think that's what Liberty are going to bring us, the next stage.
Yeah, I think that seems to be the general consensus. There are still a lot of people on social media who aren't very happy about it, but they did a big press conference, didn't they, as well, Pete, in following the announcement between Dorna and Liberty Media. What have you made of it all?
Yeah, I think it's, as Keith says, the big tagline at the moment, it seems to be growth. They want to grow the sport, don't they? They're not looking to try and squeeze every last penny out of it. They're looking to make money, if you like, by making the sport bigger. And it's all growth, expansion. That's what they're talking about at the moment. And I think that's what we all want to see, really. It's going to be interesting to see how they do that. We've got some sort of indicators here and there. One thing they have specifically said is that they're targeting the US as a growth market. So, it'll be interesting to see if they can do that. It won't be an easy thing to do, will it? I know that they've done it with Formula One, and I think it'll be interesting to see if they follow the blueprint of Formula One. I think that's what we all assume. They'll take what worked for them in Formula One and try and apply it to MotoGP. How well that will work remains to be seen. Some things will work well, some things probably won't apply. Different sports. But interesting times. And MotoGP, if you just take the American angle and the growth that they're looking for there, I mean, 16 riders on the grid at the moment are from Spain and Italy alone. That's it. So it's going to be a big job to try and translate that into an American audience. Obviously, an American rider would help. So you've got to look at guys like Joe Roberts, who's had a good start to the year in Moto2, potentially stepping in there. They've got Trackhouse as a team. So there's things in place that can work for them in terms of growing the sport. But I think that caught the eye was the focus on America.
There was a bit of chat as well, wasn't there, about, oh, will there suddenly be loads and loads of street tracks and street races? I'm not quite sure that would be the case in MotoGP as it has been in Formula One. I mean, Amy, you obviously worked inside Dorna. You've seen that side of it as well. How good do you think this will be for them as well to open up into those markets? What have you thought of it?
I think from a fan's perspective, initially, I think everyone can breathe a sigh of relief, because one of the things that they were quick to point out is that they're not looking to change the sport. The sport is as much of a spectacle as it possibly could be right now. You can't improve our sport. It's as exciting and exhilarating as you're going to get. So I think from that standpoint, we can all kind of go, okay, great stuff. They're not coming in to change the format, change the technical regulations as yet. Who knows what happens in the future. But I think that is reassuring. Like we've just mentioned, they are trying to expand into different markets. From an insider's point of view, something that I think would be really beneficial to the sport. Dorna are obviously a Spanish company. And I think Carmelo would almost pride himself in the fact that a lot of the employees are from Spain, because, essentially, is a Spanish company that has done exceptionally well for themselves in an international market, but they're trying to put back in still from a national point of view. However, I can, from an insider's point of view, see how maybe that's limited certain areas of growth, and it would be amazing if Liberty come in and put in people with outside experience, a more international vibe. I think you can still see in areas of the sport there's quite a Spanish heavy background. I don't want to see any more riders holding up signs and things like that at pre-event press conferences. So hopefully there is some kind of rejig coming up from that perspective, so we can have a bit. It's not so much Spanish dominated sport. It becomes a bit more on an international level, and you can go up to Jack Jones on the street and talk about MotoGP, and they will know exactly what you're talking about, rather than kind of they look at you and you kind of have to revert back to Barry Sheene, Valentino Rossi. Like, that's what I feel like I always have to do.
This is the thing, isn't it? It's MotoGP now trying to, I think, take the right step, because they need to now define this new post Valentino Rossi era, right? And Renita, I don't know if you caught the I think it was the Amazon Prime docu series that MotoGP attempted a couple of seasons ago now, which I think is fair to say kind of flopped. But the good news about Liberty coming in is that what they did in Formula One was they opened it up more for not quite the average Joe, but you could get more access to behind the scenes. But they gave unprecedented access to Netflix for Drive to Survive. Surely you'd think this would be the way that Liberty should go with MotoGP as well, because, for content creators too, we want people creating stories about the sport more, so it gets more eyeballs, it gets that bigger reach, right?
Exactly. No, you're exactly right with that. In Australia, we didn't get the Amazon Prime MotoGP show for, I think it was almost 6 months after it was released in Europe. So by the time we got it down here, it's halfway through the next season. It's all long gone. The news is old, right? But like you said, it's Liberty, what they've done so well with Formula One is they've told a story. They've showed people who can't necessarily afford a ticket or go to an event all this behind the scenes outlook and get to know the drivers, get to know the teams, all the personalities, the characters there. If we can have that with MotoGP, like Amy said, the average person who doesn't necessarily is going to follow it will all of a sudden know who Marc Marquez is, or is going to know Pedro Acosta, is going to know Augusto Fernandez. The lower riders as well are going to come into play, and it's going to be great for the sport to keep growing and building from there. And then for us content creators, it opens more doors for our storytelling as well.
Yeah, I think it's an exciting time. So it'll be intriguing to see how it all unfolds. Of course, it is still subject to all of these, what's the word for it? Not commercial rights, competitive rights, isn't it, Keith?
Monopolies.
Because
you've got the EU
monopolies. That's it.
The Commission's got to look at it. So at the end of the day, it's a question of two premier sports that are owned by one company, whether that gives them a monopoly on the premier sports space, if you like, in motorsport. So we'll see how that pans out. But I think there's plenty of room for that negotiation. We've talked about it in our podcast last week, so if anybody wants to refer back to that. I tell you what, Pete, if I might come to you, really amusing, I felt, from the FIM press release that came out, that basically had to underline the fact the FIM is the owner of the following championships, and they listed all the championships that Dorna have got, because the FIM always feel like they're being isolated to one side. Quite rightly so, because just about everybody didn't get on with the FIM for many, many, many years, although the FIM are coming back on board a bit more. The FIM, by the way, folks, is obviously the licensing territory. They're the people that give the rights to various people as well. But it's the fact they felt the need to have to send out a press release. We're the owners of this. We're in this party. They couldn't not send something out for everybody to look at to show that they were still a force to be reckoned with within the sport, they think.
Yeah, I mean, on paper, the Grand Prix Commission is 4 parties, isn't it? And it's FIM, IRTA, Dorna, and the MSMA. But in reality, it's the MSMA and the Dorna group, if you like, because IRTA and the FIM, they're basically going to vote with Dorna. And Dorna sort of, they're the powerhouse there, aren't they? Exactly what you're saying, Keith. And so Liberty taking over the Dorna role, if you like, they're going to have quite a lot of power. Now, that's in terms of the sporting rules and everything else. It gets more complicated with changing technical rules because you've got all the manufacturers can veto something if they're unanimously against it, for example, and all these kind of things, these sort of unofficial agreements sometimes that are sort of associated with the technical rules, things like not changing things within the 5-year contract period, again to give the stability and things like that. But the reality is that Dorna can basically, or the commercial rights holder, I suppose we should say, Liberty, Dorna, whoever, they can push things through. They do have the ultimate power now. It's just that they choose to give the manufacturers in the technical rules some control over stopping things that they're really against, because at the end of the day, you need to work with them, don't you? They're your partners. They're paying to build the machines that are going to be racing. So you've got to, it's this sort of dance of keeping everybody happy and on board. But as you guys have already said, the bottom line is that Liberty are going to want exciting racing, just as Dorna did, because that sells the sport more easily, doesn't it? So nobody wants boring races. Everyone wants exciting stuff, exciting finishes, everyone competitive. So I think everyone's going to be going in the same direction, but there are always vested interests along the way that they're going to have to negotiate.
And, well, talk of the races. Well, first one was a little bit boring, wasn't it? But Amy, you're going to be taking over the reins for hosting the podcast for the next few weeks. What have you made of the season so far? Because we haven't actually had you on the pod yet this year. You've been a bit busy with some off-track, having another baby. Congratulations as well.
Thank you very much.
Jorge Martin's leading the way at the moment, but Marc Marquez, Pedro Acosta, there's some good storylines that are going to continue throughout this season, right?
I think where Qatar was a bit of a letdown, let's be honest, it wasn't the explosive kind of action we're used to seeing from Qatar, and whether some of that is to do with where Yamaha are, because if you think back to kind of the classic show-stopping openers, Yamaha always used to have a little part to play, even in the years where Marc Marquez dominated the rest of the season. Qatar always used to give you that glimmer of hope because Yamaha would be there and you'd be like, oh, it's fine. He's not going to win every single race. And then you kind of go through the season like, oh, he's going to win every single race. But I think Portimao basically put the season on a bit more of a higher platform of expectation. Like, this is really the action we're going to see. Pedro Acosta is going to come in, tear up the rule book. There's no more Mr. Nice Guy. We're not going to see riders for the rest of the season shaking hands in Parc Ferme. I think he is going to really kind of come in and perhaps add that little bit of spice that I think is maybe been missing. And in talking of spice, the incident between Marc Marquez and Pecco Bagnaia, I got real like kind of throwback vibes. I was like, wow, okay. There's no love lost clearly between the two of them. I think it was Jack Miller who mentioned that had been going on in previous laps. If that's the way the season again is going to, start off, and where we've got Marc Marquez on equal machinery, so he can kind of take part in the dogfight. You've got the likes of Pedro Acosta, you've got your Jorge Martins, and then he's going to be an absolute showstopper. And so that's why we need as many eyes on the sport as possible. When Renita was talking about, the kind of flop that was the Netflix equivalent of our, MotoGP documentary, the first thing that came into my mind was like, imagine if our documentary was the 2015 year with Rossi Marquez. If we get in the next couple of seasons, because I don't think it will perhaps all explode this season, but if people start growing in confidence on their bikes, they've got more time on their machinery, you've got the likes of Pedro Acosta that is going to craft his skill and just be a real player. In another couple of seasons, I think we could be back to those heady days where like the headlines were jaw-dropping.
You've got Acosta, who's already fired that shot across the bows. I mean, his second Grand Prix, he's on the podium. He's already won Moto3. He's already won Moto2. The guy is top dog. But where it's going to sell and where Liberty are going to really... I mean, how many times did you just mention Acosta in that last piece you were talking about, Amy? And we're all talking the same. We're all talking the same about it. But there was a MotoGP.com is the MotoGP website, which I'll point you guys to that are listening or watching. They're referring today to a television program that Acosta appeared on. And the kid is absolutely heaven sent for our sport. He's got real personality. He was a bit miffed about the fact that secondhand stuff was being advertised on eBay and various other sites as being his. And he says, it's nothing to do with me. These people are just making it up effectively. So he decided, and the way he justified, the fact is, he said, I've got a quote here. Let me just write. I have a big ego and I search for things about me on Google. Now, who doesn't do that? Everybody does it. And to hear that Acosta has said this on a television program in Spanish, I have a big ego and I search for things about me on Google. One day I thought to check Wallapop or whatever it is to see what was being sold of Pedro Acosta. And I saw boots, sliders, gloves and things that weren't mine, but claimed to be. So I got tired of being laughed at. So what he did was he advertised some second-hand underpants of his own on the site to sell off. And he said, I could laugh at them by selling my used but victorious underwear. I mean, that is heaven, manna from heaven for people like Liberty. They've just taken over a show. Okay, we've lost Rossi. He was yesterday's man nowadays, and it won't be long. He will never be forgotten because the Mike Halewoods, the legends of the sport, will always be remembered as everybody's grown up with the likes of Rossi. But we've got a man here, a young man, 19 years old. He's got, 10, 15 years left in him yet for producing this. We've got a sea change with Liberty being on board, and he is just going to, grow into this role as long as he don't get injured.
That's well, yeah, touch wood. That I mean, that's exactly the character you want, isn't it? Was that he also did another interview? I saw a clip of something where somebody was asking him how he was getting to the next race or something, what flight he was taking, and he was like, "Oh no, I'm getting the bus. I can't afford a plane ticket. I've got no money." And you just think, fantastic, more of that, please. Well, look, Amy's going to be taking over the race for the next couple of shows, so she'll be here with you for your previews and reviews for the next part of the season. But now, let's dive into some of your questions that you've sent in. And we're going to attempt to begin with a voice note question, assuming it works. So I'm going to hit the button, and let's all hope for the best. Let's hear what our first question is.
Just after some advice, my wife and I are heading to Misano for the MotoGP round this year. We can't wait. It's our first overseas MotoGP visit. Just after maybe some advice, things to see and do in Misano. We're there for 7 days.
Nice. So it sounds like they're coming from your neck of the woods, Renita, all the way over to Misano. Well, hang on. Who's been to Misano? I'm assuming, Renita, have you been to Misano before?
No, I haven't, but I'm going to say the rest of you have, Amy, Pete.
I would presume the others haven't they? Well, should we start? Well, go on, Keith, you start. Give your little insider guide then for Misano from your perspective.
The first advice is for Renita: find out who that bloke is and get in his suitcase.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're listening and you need someone to go with you, hi. I'll come.
Your husband will be walking in a minute. Misano is one of the advice would be is that you're not going to get any sleep. So, and you're traveling all the way from Australia as well, depending on how much in advance that you've got to catch up on it. There is just so much to do. You're on the coast, the Adriatic coast. There's tons of stuff going on from Riccione all the way along Cattolica. You've got to Vuglia, just 6 kilometres as the crow flies to Rossi land. Go and have a pizza in Valentino Rossi's place. But the buzz, every street you walk down and everywhere you go around that area, around the track, it's a very compact area, is named after somebody famous. The Giro Cato Drive or whatever it is the bit that goes into the front entrance. This is funny, isn't it? I've been around for 150 years now, and we're talking about it, and the hairs are standing up on my hands while we talk about it because I still get excited by it. believe me, young man, that's going from Oz to Misano, you are not going to be disappointed. But it is flat out. Even the streets outside, you can get beer. I mean, when we come out after doing a broadcast, you're fairly knackered. You've been there 4 days. You've been flat out from 5 o'clock in the morning. I mean, most people that are on this pod will understand that. And in the evening, pretty much you want to go and lay down because you've had a really intensive time. But when you're finished on a Sunday night and you're completely knackered and expired, you come out of the place. There's a lot of crowd about, and there's all the bars and all the places you can eat all along the street outside. So all you end up doing is getting pissed, hoping and trying to find a nominated driver before you go back to the hotel or the airport. And I love that. And people walk past and go, "Oh, you're so and so," or "You're," depending on who you're sitting with. It could be anybody. It could be riders from World Superbikes that have been in there. There'll be people walking past those little bars that you'll recognise from all walks of motorcycle racing that have been to watch the races at Misano. I mean, I love it. I really do. And there are some points you could obviously go to the shrine of Nicky Hayden's shrine, which is obviously where he was knocked off his push bike. So there are things that you can go and do. You can pay homage to obviously Simoncelli if you fancy it, or anybody else. There's people, there's places to go and see around there within the immediate vicinity, or you can travel a bit further and enjoy, within 10 kilometres, loads of other things to do. So you ain't going to be disappointed, and you aren't going to have any sleep.
And you're going to have a few hangovers as well.
Yeah. Well, Amy, you were nodding profusely at the after-work drinks. Was that you back in Misano?
I ended up with a bit of a nickname, and I really don't want to share what that nickname was. But like Keith pointed out, it's a great one because there's so many bars and restaurants that you can kind of like. It always ended up being the race for me that turned into a bit of a jolly. Obviously, I was there working, but also it was a bit of a jolly. That and Phillip Island. Phillip Island, I think, has like the same kind of vibe. But definitely my first year back after having my first baby, I had been, for most of the season, kind of like flying as a very responsible mother would do, flying out as late as possible, coming back as early as possible. But for some reason, I ended up being very early in Misano. So I kind of thought it was a great idea to start drinking at 10 o'clock in the morning. And as it would happen, I think I'd had a couple of races off. There must have been a couple of flyaways before Misano in that year or something. For some reason, I had a couple of races off. And I ended up basically getting kind of stuck in the bar in the hotel because every time I went to go and leave and go and get myself ready, for dinner, somebody else would come and sit down and buy a drink for me. And I think Cal might have been one of them. I think Cal Crutchlow was there that year as well. And so he came and sat down. He wasn't drinking, but I ended up ordering. Anyway, 11 Prosecco's later, we went for dinner. And one of the ladies that I used to work with, Fran, she also kind of came to dinner. I saw her the next day in the circuit. I was obviously feeling a little bit squiffy-headed. And I was like, "Oh, hey, Fran, how you doing? You all right?" And she said, "I saw you last night." So that is the kind of vibe of Misano. I think it's like everyone tends to get a little bit carried away, but the atmosphere is amazing. I think it's just one of the track invasion, the whole Italian vibe. It's a great race to come to. I think you picked.
I actually feel sorry for Pete McLaren here because when you're a proper journo, and he's nodding, if anybody's not watching this on YouTube, you should. Because the reason for that is because the one thing that we used to do as television broadcasters, when our live programs had finished, we'd walk past the media centre with all them poor beastards, all in there scribbling and typing, and they'd be there until after midnight, still trying to scrabble the copy out through the door, or just hilarious from our point of view. We're all pissed and you're all working. So how is Misano for you, Pete?
Well, yeah, obviously nothing to match you and Amy's tales. Although all I can say is I'll give you one story because you've given all the info. I mean, if you want the travel stuff, Bologna's the nearest airport, realistically, isn't it? You can hire a car, you can get on the train, get yourself down to Rimini. There's Airbnbs or hotels. You can't really go wrong. Just watch the traffic, I guess. But yeah, so last year, I arrived on the Wednesday.
I like that. Practical advice.
There you are. That's all you need to know. Get yourself there and then beer and pizza. We'll sort you the rest of the weekend,
sober,
right?
Harry.
Yeah. So last year was back to back with Barcelona. So myself and Neil Morrison, it was an early morning flight. We flew into Bologna, got down to Rimini. Neil's dad was down to watch the race, so we went for an evening meal on the Wednesday by the beach. And the restaurants that Keith was saying about, there's a beachfront, long beachfront, loads of places to eat and drink. We're having a meal, and I saw sort of Neil's sort of eyes sort of raise, and behind us walked a certain Marc Marquez in full civilian gear. Nobody recognised him. This was the Wednesday before the race, and I looked and I just said to Neil, I said, "Oh, don't worry, he's just signing for next year." Now, of course, the next day, all of the rumours burst, didn't they, about Marco Grassini? Well, I can tell you now, he was out the day before having a look around the beach. So who knows? But there we are. Who knows who you might see if you're eating by the beachfront before the race weekend. But yeah, it's a great event to go to. I know the Italian team, sometimes with their sponsors and guests, they'll tell them, look, don't go to Mugello. There's nothing to do, outside of the racetrack. Go to Misano. So, and that's why, because it's much more accessible and there's always stuff to do. So.
Well, enjoy your trip to Misano. I hope that gave you a little taste of what you could get up to. Next question. This was actually aimed at you, Pete. So we'll chuck it to you first. From Woody. He says, howdy. Why doesn't MotoGP get involved with running smaller engines, hybrid systems, a bit like Formula One?
I'd say it's the cost straight away on that one. I mean, smaller engines, it looks like in 27 they will go to this 850cc, so a smaller engine. But the trouble is the hybrid part. There was some talk that maybe some manufacturers might be interested in that, but the danger is that you're going to the cost, and then secondly, the grid will spread out. You'll get some people that will be really good at it, that can afford to throw lots of money at it straight away. Others that can't will fall behind. And I think that's the worry. We were speaking earlier, weren't we, about liberty and about wanting a good show and even racing. And so really a big change like that, the chances are it's going to, unless all of the manufacturers said, look, we really want this. This is what we need to be more involved in the sport. And ideally, other manufacturers said, we'll come in if you do that. If there was that sort of push, maybe. But I think at the moment, the dangers in terms of the costs and the spreading the field out, it just means that it won't happen for now. Who knows in the future? But certainly, yeah, I think, it looks like the rules are 27, smaller engines. They'll get rid of some of the aero, the ride height devices, that kind of stuff, and they'll be on the 100% non-fossil fuel, isn't it? That's sort of what we're looking like for let's say, the medium-term future. Beyond that, who knows?
Very good. All right. Thank you very much for that question, Woody. Okay, this one is aimed at everybody now from Zach. If you could start a MotoGP team for next year, who would you place as your two riders, your team principal, and which manufacturer's bike are you choosing? So you're on the grid for next year. Who are you riding? Who is your team principal? And who is your manufacturer bike? Who wants to begin that one? Who's feeling bold? None of you.
Everyone's going to say Ducati.
Well, no, I'm
None
not.
of you. Okay.
I'm not. No.
Are you not?
Go on then,
Go on then,
Keith.
you
I'm going
start,
to go
Keith.
KTM. I'm going to go KTM.
Oh.
KTM, Binder and Acosta will be my two. I'd bring back Livio Supo.
Okay.
There you go. I like Livio. He's aggressive as hell. He suits me down to the ground. Davide Brivio, of course, because he's another absolute star. I just think a combination, for me, that would be what you got to bear in mind, folks, is that I love a gamble. I don't like obvious. It's kind of like never been my personality to be obvious. So mine might be a little bit left of field. Ducati's too easy. But I think that KTM has still got a bit to...
Yeah, Amy.
KTM have got a bit to prove. And they've got the money.
I feel like I always go out of left field, so I'm actually going to go more for the sure thing. I'm going to do Ducati, Acosta, Jorge Martin, and Francesco Guidotti to run the team.
Oh, solid.
I was pretty much the
safe
same.
bet.
Yeah, I was pretty much the same, but not Jorge Martin. I just keep Pecco there.
Pecco and Acosta, alongside Acosta.
Pecco and Acosta, because it's a balance. Because it's the professor with Pecco, and then it's like the young, crazy Latina energy, like, of Pedro. Yeah, that's what I feel.
Why do I get the feeling Pete is loading his gun at the moment?
Yeah.
No, I'm just thinking that's a good idea. That's a good idea. That's a good idea. Yeah.
I thought you might come up with like, what about an MV Augusta or something like that, Pete?
No, I'd go Ducati, so I'm boring on this one. But I'd go GP24, not GP23. I'd say that much. But yeah, for me, I'd go Acosta and Marc Marquez. I think you go for the young, rising star, and then the established guy. And as you guys have said, you've got the Pecos out there. I suppose Quartararo, Martin, those guys are established. But yeah, I go with Marquez just because he's still on the rise on the Ducati, I think. I don't think we've seen what he can do on it yet. Who knows where he will be, but he's already head and shoulders above the other guys on the 23, the same bike as him, isn't he? So I think if you put him on the 24, it'd be pretty good. So those would be my two guys. Team manager, I'll go Gino Borsoy, I think. Pramac. I think that his first year at Pramac, I like him. He's a down-to-earth, no flashiness, gets the job done, and I thought he did a fantastic job at Pramac last year. So you know what? I'll go with Gino.
I'd have Jeremy Burgess as a consultant. Got to have Jeremy Burgess.
Well,
and you're
just adding more and more people to your team.
My team's a bit management heavy, but I'm quite happy with it. And believe me, if you had Acosta and Marquez in the same team, you're going to be back to the wall. There's definitely going to be a fight between those two.
Well, yeah.
Keith, would you have ever, gone into, some sort of management or working with a team? Would you have ever wanted to do that?
There's been offers for that in the UK and beyond. I mean, I don't know why. I think it must be my lovely sense of humour that does it. But it's kind of to be management, you've got to be unbelievably smart, tenacious, have a financial background as well to a great extent. I mean, there are so many things to being if you're in a small team particularly, you've got to have a lot of skills. You've got to be multi-skilled with things. It's the bigger teams that score from the management point of view to make that all work. You can understand. But with more management comes more pressure. I mean, you've only got to look at Ducati. That red camp sometimes, you wouldn't want to put a finger in there to get burnt. It looks quite serious, which is why Pramac's my kind of team. Big party on a Friday night, karaoke. Not that I can sing, but I might try for you if you ask. Maybe that can go on Patreon. That could turn everyone off.
No, well, I don't think anybody's going to pay for that, sadly.
I'm doing it.
No matter how hard we try. Yeah. And let us know if you subscribe to that.
I'll have to tell you this. I had a sponsor in Bedford who used to sponsor Jonathan Palmer as well. The guy who owns MSVR. Me and JP were sponsored by a building firm called SDC Builders that was run by two lovely guys, Dave Ledson and Bob Reynolds, back in the day. They're both not with us anymore. But it was Dave was a renowned. Well, they were all renowned drunkards. It was incredible. They were building people at the end of the day, so they used to know how to take quantities on board. They should go to Misano. Anyway, an aside. So we're at this party, and they said to me, if you sing, we'll give you 10 grand extra on your sponsorship. Bearing in mind this is early 80s, 10 grand was quite a lot of money. So I sang like a canary. I cleared a room. You'd never heard anything like it in your life. And they paid it.
Did they pay up?
Yeah.
There we go. Well, you know what? In that case, if anybody wants to give us 10 grand, Keith will sing. We'll all sing. We'll sing the choir. We'll sing whatever you want to do.
And we'll split it.
They might give you 20 grand not to sing. So, that's another option.
Yeah. We're open to all options. We need to continue to support this channel. Thank you very much, Zach. We went a bit off-road with that question at the end, but thank you very much. Okay, next one. This one's from Jane. Renita, what's it like having a MotoGP race winner as your brother? Was your life MotoGP heavy growing up?
Oh, yes. It's our funny story, right? I actually had lunch with my mum today and we were talking about my childhood and I was like, I was literally brought up on a motorbike track. Like my earliest memories are of me at a motorbike track and it's crazy, right? But I generally just thought it was quite normal. And as my brother's career progressed, I was so lucky that I got to travel with him and I wasn't there when he won his MotoGP race, but I got to experience when he won the Supersport World Championship and all these incredible moments. But it was so cool for me watching what it was like for him, how he worked so hard. Like I remember it was the middle of summer here in Australia, which is the winter over in Europe, right? And they're getting ready to do the winter test in Sepang. In the middle of the day here, it's like 35 plus degrees, hot and humid. And my brother's out off running because he's like, I need to lose the weight. I need to stay as trim as I can. So watching that dedication that he put into his craft, how much he worked on it, his skills. And one of my favorite things was actually watching him testing with Suzuki and how he would communicate with the team and the riders and the parts that would go on this bike. And mind you, that's, 10 plus years ago. So the bikes have changed so much. But watching his skill come to life, so incredible to see from the behind the scenes. But as a sister, I'm definitely very proud of what he achieved. So it was pretty cool. Got to experience some cool things, got some cool stories. I was a lot younger back then, but going to tracks like the old Assen back in the day and getting to ride a little PW50 or something around the track and going to Laguna Seca when MotoGP used to go there and walking up the corkscrew and these memories just flooding back in. And it was such a cool childhood. So yeah, very lucky there.
Never fancied getting on the bike yourself?
Look, I can ride. I have my bike license here in Australia and I grew up riding dirt bikes, but my brother's got two daughters, right? And whenever they jump on the bikes with me, it's always, can you go faster? Dad can go faster. So that's where my motorcycle riding career ends.
Well, I mean, the reason I asked that is because the next question, Meg has asked, directed at Amy, but we'll open up to everyone. Amy, are you looking forward to the all-female motorcycle racing championship this year? Do you see it making an overall effect on getting more women involved in the sport?
I'm 100% excited to see how it all kind of works and pans out. I think we thrashed the kind of like talking points in an earlier podcast, didn't we, in terms of, whilst hopefully they'll kind of change the billing of it as rather than it being like a top billing, more of a kind of stepping stone. I think like that would be cool because at the moment, that's the only thing that I'm like, I don't want that to be the messaging out to future young riders. I'd like to see that messaging change. But then on the other hand, any opportunity for girls to see girls racing is amazing. And on a world stage, on a world platform where you've got world-class riders is going to be incredible. Like that is going to draw. And the other thing I noticed a lot with W Series, I covered W Series for a few seasons before they obviously kind of curtains closed. But what I noticed was a lot of dads would say to me that they had watched W Series with their daughters and even their sons purely because it was on at the same time. And I think that is going to be the real benefit of it being alongside World Superbikes, is that if you're going to watch World Superbikes that weekend, if they're going to put those races out live at the same time, then you are inclined to carry on watching. So hopefully more people, more young, girls and hopefuls will watch from that angle.
The good stuff regarding all of that, Amy, is that Liberty will be across all of this. They've had all this in Formula One. They've had all of this with W Series and so on and so forth. So the new owners will be across this. This will be in its proper place. I always feel that after time, we're sort of almost box ticking with some of this stuff. But I feel that somebody like Liberty will get behind it and will make that work along the lines you're talking about. Some of the girl racers we know, from my own perspective, Jenny Timoth is one of my favourites, the comments that she makes. I mean, she wants to race against everybody. She doesn't want a women's series to be the glass ceiling that women will reach and there'd be no place to go into Grand Prix proper. She wants to race it. And as we've talked about before, I mean, there is no bar for women at all in our sport. There's not a fitness bar. There's not a mental bar. There's not a strength bar. Motorcycle racing is open to all. So I think Liberty will be, they're already pretty well prepped on it. I mean, they've had quite a lot of aggravation in the F1 paddock over the female situation, and if I may call it that. And I think that they'll be across that really early. So I think all these elements are going to meet up for girls and women to take benefit of that as we move forward as early as 24, 25 even.
I think the having done F1 Academy last season, the first year of that, which is sort of what replaced W Series in the four-wheeled world, this year in their second season, what I quite like, and some people are going, well, it's just for show, but you almost have to do a little bit of that to push it forward further, right? And they have all the Formula One teams have an association with an F1 Academy driver. So Red Bull have their own F1 Academy driver, so do Ferrari, and there are obviously 10 teams, but the ones who aren't associated with F1 teams are associated with really big name brands. So like Charlotte Tilbury, the makeup brand, is associated with one of the drivers in the cars, and that's a massive thing, not only for the women she's supporting through the brand, but also a makeup brand. It's the first time they've ever done a deal that big in sort of top flight motorsport under the guise of the Formula One banner. So I think if there's a way of that maybe can be almost recreated for this new racing series this year, that would be another excellent marker. But of course, this all takes time, doesn't it? But I think that would be a nice way forward. Thank you very much. I think that was Meg who asked that question. We've got time for, I think, 2 more, and then we'll wrap things up. Crawford. Let's come to Keith on you on this first. We have all seen that the demographic of MotoGP fan, as well as road motorcyclists, keeps getting older, and there is a lack of youngsters coming into the bike world, especially in the UK. What can be done to fix this, and how much of it is due to the ridiculous age-related licensing system for youngsters in this country? That's from Crawford.
Well, the biggest problem we got in the UK, if we're speaking UK specific, I mean, the Italians have got it right, the Spanish have got it right. They've got loads of mini-moto tracks and the likes, and the encouragement comes from an earlier age. Plus the fact that normal mode of transport in a hot country, again, you can move across to Asia if you want to. You know, the reason why there's a lot more going on in Asian places is because everybody rides a motorcycle from a very, very early age. In the UK, we don't. We've taken a massive hit here. The weather is awful. Racetracks don't provide enough mini moto series or tracks to make that work. Although there have been in recent times movement towards that. Peter Hickman runs a series. You know, it kind of. I find it strange when MSVR, who probably because they're orientated with BSB and towards World Superbikes still, and because we all come online a lot later in the UK anyway as motorcycle racers. There's no money in this country at the end of the day. There's none of the sponsorship that you need to start at a very early age. If your family, and again, if I look at Acosta, you know, if you look at Pedro Acosta's background, you know, all of his thanks goes to his grandfather who encouraged and helped him, his father, his mother, his family. If you go to Casey Stoner, if we move across to Australia, you know, his mum and dad, Colin and Bronwyn, I think it was, that you know, they brought him over here at a very, very early age and spent all their money on him. You can go through these processes and see what commitment families have made from a motorcycle point of view. But I think at the end of the day, there needs to be a bigger training area at a younger age. Now, things have moved slightly because you can only be. It was that you could join in Grand Prix at 15 if you were a junior world champion at the point of view. But now it's gone to 18. They've moved. You know, the organisation has moved that minimum age up to 18 years old, which will give some of the other countries, particularly the UK, a bit of breathing room. Because I think a lot of people here, if you haven't made it by the time you're 18, or if you're not on some factory bike by the time you're 20, your career in MotoGP is already gone. You're already looking towards the World Superbikes or something where, you know, the longevity seems to be a little bit longer for your career. So it's a multifaceted answer that needs addressing here. Not enough finance is a big issue in this country. We don't have someone in MotoGP to encourage families to perhaps get involved or take notice. We don't have the right kind of PR to really get more people. I think, did you mention it earlier on, Amy, that you know, people down the street, you'll find that you have to explain MotoGP to 50% of the people that you talk to because they don't know what MotoGP is. Formula One, they understand it. That might be because of the percentage-wise, more people drive cars than ride motorbikes. So there are a lot of avenues that need addressing. This is not a one-year fix. This is a long-term fix. But from a racing perspective, you know, I bag on about. I sound like I give Silverstone a hard time. I shouldn't do because they're only 15 minutes down the road and they can send the heavy boys up here, you know, fairly quickly. But you know, it kind of annoys me that Silverstone don't really cater for motorcycles. They say they do, but they really don't make the same kind of effort. I know they don't make anything like the money out of it. Maybe now Liberty are on board as well, and the Formula One influence will influence Silverstone to doing a bit more for motorcycles. You know, the new kart track they were building up there. You know, Stuart Pringle at one time sort of conceded that probably they didn't quite do enough for motorcycles, mini motos and so on and so forth. So I asked at that time, will it be a mini moto track as well? But it seems to me that they've steered away from that, purely and simply because they didn't want like footrest gouging the tarmac when people fell off and stuff like that to affect the kart guys, which are the posh boys that spend all the money. You know, it's 150 grand to go kart racing nowadays. So you've got a situation where, you know, the BRDC club, the British Racing Drivers Club that own and manage Silverstone, here we can't have those smelly old motorcycles around here. And they've dumped the track days now. There's no track days at Silverstone in 2024. Rumour had it because the Formula One film that's being made is kind of needing the track time. So they've dumped all the track days at Silverstone. You know, Silverstone pay lip service, I think, and more so lately. They've been hiding behind a bit of a smokescreen, in my view, as far as the bikes are concerned. Yeah, they spend quite a bit of money on the MotoGP to get it right, and they don't make much money out of it. But I sometimes feel that they're their own worst enemy because they're not really catering to motorcyclists in the way that they should be, and certainly not in the younger end of the sport. Or is that me being harsh?
Yeah.
Yeah,
and it is that younger end of the sport that MotoGP wants to tackle, both to find new riders, but also to for the people watching as well. Pete, I wonder, because Pete, you're sort of based around the world these days. The MotoGP calendar as well. Do you think that could be quite an interesting thing to monitor, to see what that does for particular areas of the world where MotoGP isn't that well known, and can try and encourage sort of more people into the sport from the grassroots level?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? What Keith's saying about the familiarity with bikes and cars and F1. You know, how important is it that people know about riding motorbikes if they want to follow MotoGP? Now, if you're Liberty, you'll probably be hoping that it isn't that important, because to get the big growth that they're after, they've got to bring in people who don't know what it's like to ride a motorbike, haven't they? It's kind of inconclusive when you look at the calendar at the moment, because you've got massive events in France, Germany. And then you've also got Buriram, Sepang in Malaysia. So you've got two completely different markets, and yet they're both doing well in some cases. And yet there's other cases, Keith just explained about Silverstone, that are struggling to get fans in. So it's a really complicated one. It'd be interesting to know how important it is for people to actually, do they need to follow motorcycling or understand motorcycling to become involved in the sport? If I watch, I don't know, surfing or something, I'm not going to understand why they're doing what they're doing, but it kind of looks cool, and so I'll keep watching it. But again, and then you come into the whole free-to-air TV thing, don't you? And I think Liberty, you'll know more about this, Harry, than me. When they were looking to go into America, didn't they give the TV rights away for either very cheap or basically they wanted to get it out there, get the sport out there and get it known? And that's MotoGP's kind of gone in this circle, isn't it, where it's gone away from free-to-air TV, done the deals to get the money, but it's gone behind pay-per-view. And then, of course, you don't have the new young audience coming in because people don't stumble across it on TV. And so then it goes into a circle of you make it free to air again to try and get new people involved. So there's lots of things at play here. And coming back to the question about the licensing and things, yeah, I think it's far too complicated in the UK. I think that, especially now you've got e-bikes coming along, that, let's face it, some of them look, I see them zipping along and they look almost as powerful as a very small combustion engine bike, and yet you don't need a license for those, do you? I think it should be, to be able to get on some form of motorized or propelled vehicle should be really easy, because that's what we want. It's good for the environment, the traffic and all that kind of stuff. And then, okay, if you want to get on a superbike or something, yeah, you're going to have to be pretty qualified. But at the moment, it is way too complicated. But again, interested to know if actually riding has anything to do with watching MotoGP.
Yeah. I kind of think it doesn't though, Pete. I think, to be honest with you, I mean, like, people that are fans of F1 don't all drive F1 cars. And I think that's going to be the key, is mainstream media coverage, particularly in the UK, of MotoGP is non-existent. It was interesting because I was watching, I think it was Matt Oxley retweeted a feature from, might have been CNBC potentially, where the Liberty CEO was talking about their acquisition of MotoGP, and just listening to the anchor talking about MotoGP felt weird and alien. And it was almost like she didn't really understand what she was talking about. She didn't know why Liberty would buy such a thing. So I think there needs to be a situation, like we said, okay, maybe playing around with the TV rights, so there are more opportunities for free to air. I think we've covered this in the past, where ITV get a couple of races a year to air free, but they're not allowed to, publicize that they've got them. It's essentially exposing us to more people, and the only way we can do that is by getting more coverage on the mainstream media. Like Renita pointed out, allowing content creators to come and make content so kids are watching, the crazy things that these guys we know can do on a bike, and just how much as a fan attending a sport, you can really feel that excitement just standing trackside, moving around, all that kind of stuff, getting integrated in the fan zones, all of those things. So I think there's a few areas that need to be addressed: the mainstream media coverage, the content creation, opening that up a little bit, and then hopefully we can attract some new fans and keep this sport going on the up.
This is one for Renita then. The TV rights in the UK come up at the end of this year. TNT have obviously had it via BT before, but the TV rights are up for grabs at the end of this year. But I noticed in this country, I don't know whether you're aware of this, Renita, it's quite an interesting development in British touring cars here. Now, British touring cars used to have enormous television audiences in this country. It'd be like the tin tops you have, like the Bathurst and all the rest of it over there. But the tin tops over here are going on TikTok. They've just done this worldwide deal with TikTok. So it's actually, and it's been something that I've always thought that we talk about demographic, who are the people, who are the youngsters that are watching? What are they watching on? Bloody TikTok or whatever it might be, Insta, Face, this, that and the other, that old fellas like me are having a real job to keep up with. But the point being is that obviously somebody's already recognised what to do with the touring car series in this country. And it's a very interesting experiment, but Liberty will be across all of that as well. And the contract in the UK, if not in other areas as well, comes up at the end of 24. So be interesting to see what they do.
No, you're exactly right. Young people, I'm going to class myself there, young people aren't necessarily watching what's on a TV anymore, right? As soon as Netflix came in, off went the paid subscription, cable channels, and all of a sudden you've got everything at your fingertips. Then we jump online and we can watch events on YouTube for free because they're streaming live, or TikTok now, where it's short, even a minute or less videos, where people are consuming that short amount of content. I think that as that progresses more, they're going to want to see more of that stuff via a phone rather than having to sit down, turn on the TV and make a whole day of an event. Now, I love turning on the TV and watching MotoGP, but I'm not necessarily going to sit there and watch Moto2, Moto3, and then MotoGP, because it is for me, it's a whole evening. So I'm going to probably watch the main race because that's what I'm interested in, and then jump on and see the highlights and see what I want to know, get that bit of content, and then I'm going to go from there. But you can see that MotoGP or Dorna are trying to head in that direction. They're doing these little clips with the riders. They're trying to build these characters now of the this or that video, or do you know your teammate, or all these things that they're doing. And I feel like they're heading in the right direction. But having that younger audience, I think, is going to help tremendously. And hopefully with what Liberty have done in Formula One, is just going to help them propel that into the right direction. And then MotoGP is going to become a common name in every household.
That's a nice full circle moment. We started with Liberty and we're ending with Liberty as well. I think the bottom line is this is probably needed to give the MotoGP that little bit of an extra boost into the mainstream and to get it more recognised. It'd be interesting to see. Well, actually, where is it broadcast in Australia, Anita?
So there used to be Fox Sports, which I know is a worldwide. Didn't you work for Fox Sports as well, Amy, in Asia? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So
Fox Sports is a worldwide company, but there's a headquarters here in Sydney. Actually, my brother used to work for them. They had it in studio, and then they would cross over live and pretty much just to the world feed. But I think something happened with the whole Discovery TNT thing, something in the background, and then so now we just basically get the world feed. We have to pay for it here. So through our cable network, we can pay through that, or there's like another app that you can pay for. Works out pretty much the same as the video pass for us in Australia. So money-wise, it's not necessarily the most achievable for a lot of people, right? Because it is quite expensive. But yeah, we're getting the world feed, which is great. I'm a big Simon Crafar fan, so I love the tech talks, love learning about that stuff. Lucky on one of the platforms, though, we also have the TNT, so I get to watch Susie Perry and learn from her as well. So we do get both, but I mostly watch the world feed.
Yeah. No, it's just interesting to know what the other setups are. I think, well, from a UK perspective, I give some races to the BBC and have a way with it and see how it does. If in doubt, put it on the old British Broadcasting Corporation. Look, we are there at the end now. Thank you guys for showing up and for answering the questions, and thank you for sending in those questions. And a big thanks as well to our very important Patreon supporters: Anne Height, Scott Casey, Josh Miller, Peter Smith. There's another Josh, Eric Fajardo as well. Thank you so much for your support. And if you want to join them and be a Patreon subscriber too, you can head to the link in the description of this podcast, whether that's on YouTube or on the audio platforms. And also, if you don't do Patreon, there's YouTube membership as well. I mean, you don't have to do either, but it just helps support the running of the show, and in return you get priority access to ask questions. There's also a whole range of in-depth interviews available only on Patreon right now, so you can get the heads up on them. There's a Michael Laverty one, Taylor McKenzie up on there to have a look at too, with more on the way. We might even get Chris Vermeulen on the show in a few weeks time too, so we're working on that, working hard on that one. We're trying to pull some strings there, and a few more as well, but for the time being, my thanks to Amy, to Key, to Renita, to Pete, and we will be back next week in some form or another. Remember to subscribe, and we'll look forward to seeing you for the next one. See ya.